Welcome into the Big City Sports Podcast. We have another episode coming up, and today the NBA is back. Or not necessarily today, but this week the NBA has returned, and today we are bringing you all the NBA coverage you need, covering the Nets, Knicks, and Bulls. Before we do that, we do want to recap just briefly, and when I say briefly, I mean just this sentence, saying that our two NFL teams that were in action, the New York Giants, they got absolutely shellacked. The Chicago Bears lost their contest as well. The Jets had a bye week, which was, could say, much needed after the London performance. So as we get into this NBA talk, I'd like to bring in Swig and ask how you're doing today.
Doing pretty good. I'm in a much better mood than I could have been. We're recording this right after the Knicks season opener. That was not good for the blood pressure, but I'll take the result. But yeah, I'm doing good otherwise. But yeah, with the Giants thing real quick, if they're going to lose, as a fan, I kind of would rather lose like that because at least they didn't bother getting my hopes up and I moved on with my day a lot easier.
I can respect that. As a Jaguars fan, I like it when they get shellapped early, so then you can really just head over to the Red Zone channel and see anything else that's going on throughout the day. But, you know, hey, my Jaguars picked up their first victory in 20 games, so how about that? But we're not here to talk Jaguars. We're not here to talk football. We're here to get right into the NBA action, and we'll start off the top with the Brooklyn Nets. The Nets, one of the favorites, if not the favorite, to win the NBA title this year. Odds came out. I believe them and the Lakers are the main top dogs in that category as teams to watch out for. Obviously, a ton of star talent on the Nets roster, and one of those players is Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, so Kyrie Irving is on the roster, definitely fits that category of a big star. But let's just address that elephant in the room right now. He is not with the team right now. He will not participate in any Nets practices or games for the foreseeable future. That's out indefinitely, a very fluid situation. But essentially, Brooklyn being in New York City, that is, along with San Francisco, they are the two strictest NBA markets with having everyone involved with those organizations vaccinated. And Kyrie Irving is not at the time of this recording, at least. And until he is, he will not be with the team. So just briefly recapping, so found an article on The Athletic that dove into his thinking on that situation, and supposedly it's not him being anti-science or anti-vaccination. It's more for him, he's upset that people are losing jobs over vaccine mandates, doesn't like that sort of control aspect of it, and wants to give people a voice that might not have one. We know Kyrie's been outspoken on issues like this before, and he thinks that this is a fight that's much bigger than him playing basketball games. So if that's what at least the Athletic article said. There's more to it than that. I'd recommend people go read it if they can. But that's the gist of the situation. And the Nets GM came out and said, since he wouldn't be able to participate in any home practices or games right now, that he's going to be away from the team because they don't want him only being a partial player.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, there's only so much you can do if you're a partial player, because then it comes to that area of what do you practice when you're in the city? You got to find a way to gel with your teammates somehow, but when you're playing half the games, it's kind of hard to do. So I'm not here to take a stance on in the situation by any means, but it is a big loss for this Brooklyn Nets team from an on-court perspective. Kyrie's one of the best players in the world. I mean, his ball handling skills are unmatched. His talent is unmatched at the point guard position. So it's tough to not see him available so far this year. Like we said, that might change, whether it's his stance on what he wants to do as the season prolongs, or if anything becomes available for him to where he can step on the court in a quicker manner. Right now, it looks like the Nets are going to be playing without Kyrie, and we look to the on-court talent as at the point guard position. Saw James Harden get the start on the opening night. A bigger role coming up for Patty Mills too to step in.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into the rest of the roster. The Nets are still a team with a ton of star power, and they still have the goal, the ambition to win a championship. That I don't think that changes without Kyrie Irving. But just looking at him on the court, he is not replaceable, especially the ball handling. He is a special player when he is on the court. Now, obviously, that has been a big if throughout his career. I mean, he's had injury problems. He got injured his 1 year at Duke. He was in and out of the lineup at times for the Cavaliers. But I think the Kyrie Irving that we've come to know as a very volatile circus kind of player, and not in terms of some of it's personality, but some of it's just for better or worse, not all, like being out of the lineup a lot for the Celtics and the Nets, and how active he is in the community for various things off the court. And a lot of those things are good. I'm not trying to take anything away. I'm just saying it makes being a fan of the team that he plays for, it's got to be a very frustrating experience at times, because it just, I'm sure fans of the Nets just want to say, hey, we paid big money for him, he's special, we want him on the court because we won a championship. And it's just not that simple with Kyrie Irving, whether it's COVID related or not. Even before that, he's always been very active in terms of racial issues and housing and things like that, especially since pandemic started. So, and then of course all the injuries and getting rested here and there. It's got to be a really interesting experience for the team, fans, organization as a whole, right?
Yeah, it definitely has to, especially he knows what he's going to get when it comes to the media backlash and anything else that transpires. I mean, he's a generational player. And when a generational player says, hey, I'm not playing this year, or I'm not playing in half the year, which transpired to the rest of the year, at least at the time of this recording, and as we prolong throughout the season, that's going to get some attention. I mean, he's someone that has garnered a lot of attention throughout his career, whether it's good attention or bad attention. A lot of people have their opinions on Kyrie Irving and aren't afraid to voice them. So, I mean, he's one of the most celebrity type basketball players that we have in the NBA right now. And it's going to be tough not seeing him on the court with what he can bring in that area. But also as a person, I mean, he's someone that he has that big personality, does a lot in the community and all those other things. So, I mean, he's just someone that just, I know a lot of people want to see out there on the floor, but right now that's not where he's at, and we can't do anything else but respect that on his part.
Yeah, I'm not trying to take anything away. There are definitely bigger things in life than basketball. But from just a selfish, yeah, I'm sure, and I'm not trying to call Brooklyn Nets fans selfish. I'm just saying from their perspective, I'm sure they just want to see him on the court, and it's unlikely that any of the New York City vaccine requirements will be changed anytime soon. So because of that, it seems unlikely that we will see him, on the court in the near future. But just wanted to address that situation here. It definitely matters in terms of the on-court product for the Nets, but it's a bit of a complicated situation. We just very basically gave a little bit of an outline, but I'm sure there's a lot more to it than that we might not ever know. Yeah, going back to on the court though, obviously still a lot to talk about there. The other two of the Nets' big three are available and they're healthy at the start of this season, and Kevin Durant and James Harden. I expect Harden in particular to handle the ball a lot more, and that's definitely a role that he's capable of. This is still, in my mind, a championship contender, even if Kyrie Irving does not play at all. And if he's not vaccinated, I do think it makes sense to an extent to have him either be fully on the team or fully off of it, because the being there sometimes, not all the time, that inconsistency, I think that might make it more difficult for the other players to build chemistry on and off the court.
Yeah, and it not only that, but it could build in the locker room. Like if you see someone getting more minutes at home and then they perform in those minutes, whether, I'm not saying Patty Mills at the age of 33 is going to be doing that, but like say a younger player steps up and they start getting some shine. What happens when you start going on the road trip? Kyrie comes in and it messes with team chemistry on the court, but in that locker room, you're like, all right, he's coming back now. We gotta find a way to put it together. So I think it's a great move to go ahead and do that with the head coach Steve Nash there to just commit 100%. Is he playing? Is he not? And if he comes back, he's either 100% in or 100% out. So it gives that full factor both from an on-court and off-court perspective. But you brought it up. Not only do they have Kevin Durant and James Harden, they got some other all-stars on the team. LaMarcus Aldridge, Blake Griffin. Like, there are some talented players playing for this Brooklyn Nets squad to go along with the Joe Harris, who didn't have the best postseason last year. But look, this team's solid. They can shoot the basketball. They're coached well, at least they showed last year with Steve Nash. And I mean, they are absolutely 100% a title contender.
No doubt. The even with the unusual Kyrie situation here, that we'll see how that ends up getting resolved eventually. Even ignoring that for now, the rest of the talent roster is still extremely talented. I do not think, are going to struggle for points, even without that lead distributor and primary facilitator there, and a point guard who can score a lot as well. We know Harden is capable. We saw Kevin Durant almost take the Nets to the NBA Finals by himself last year. It's great to see him in 100% healthy after that serious Achilles injury he had with the Warriors. But if there were any questions about him being healthy, being older than 30 now, and having that injury relatively late in his career, I think he answered them with his outstanding playoff run, with Kyrie Irving missing a lot of that run for injury reasons, Harden missing some of it as well, and not being 100%. So I'm sure Nets fans have to be happy with that. And then the role players, I agree, Harris didn't have the best postseason, but he's still one of the best three-point shooters in the league. He was outstanding throughout the regular season. I expect him to bounce back. We know what he's capable of. You mentioned Blake Griffin, who was good last year. LaMarcus Aldridge is back. The Nets also brought in Paul Millsap in the front court. I think he should have a smaller role at this point in his career, but still think he could be useful. I really, really think, especially with Irving out, I love the Patty Mills signing even before that. I think it's going to come in even more handy now with his leadership, his ability on the offensive end. And I think Bruce Brown is going to continue to have a bigger role as well as a result of Irving's absence.
Now, I want to pose this question to you as we look at this Nets roster. Obviously, if Kyrie's out and say this is 2 months into the season, Kyrie's still not around, and it doesn't look like he's going to be returning at any point, and say not like you're losing a bunch of games, but there is some offensive production lacking, do you think they go out and try to add another point guard?
I don't know about point guard, only because I don't know how many are going to be available, and I unless they want to make a weird move for Ben Simmons, I don't know how many you could even think about having a significant impact on the offensive end. Now, Simmons, of course, just a hypothetical, you would not be relying on him to be your primary scorer if you put him in Brooklyn. But outside of that, like, the one disgruntled point guard off the top of my head, you also have to remember the Nets luxury tax situation. It would be difficult, I think, financially for them to make a huge trade if, say, Damian Lillard was on the block. Now, I think that one might be slightly more realistic in terms of star power and fit, but considering the huge contracts that Irving and Durant and Harden are already on, I think that would limit their ability to make a trade for that impactful of a player. So I could see a solid point guard on a mediocre team, possibly similar to what Patty Mills was with the Spurs. I know he was a free agent signing, but I think that level of player is more likely just for financial reasons more than anything else, even with the Nets getting rid of DeAndre Jordan's contract.
Now we look at this Nets roster as we head down, and they got a pretty tough. I mean, they're a legit team. We mentioned, regardless, we think they're going to be legit contenders and think they're going to be a solid basketball team this year. What area, if there is any, when you look at this roster, do you think, okay, the depth isn't quite there? Because I know we'll get to the Bulls later, but I'm nervous as hell about the center depth. How do you feel about the depth on this team, the Brooklyn Nets, as they go throughout the course of the season?
I think it's like it can be looked at as a slightly top-heavy roster, big in name only. I do think that front court, like even though DeAndre Jordan clearly wasn't the fit that the Nets anticipated when he was brought in, I think that front court defense might be a little bit lacking at the center position. I think they're going to be reliant on guys like Griffin and Aldridge, and to a lesser extent Nick Claxton, who I still like, to be able to provide that defense and rebounding. I do think the Nets are going to be a much stronger team offensively than defensively. I know that was a theme last year as well. They do have some guys who can defend, but they also did lose Landry Shamet in the offseason, who could be a bit of a 3-and-D guy. I liked a lot of the rookies that these guys brought, that the Nets brought in. I like Cameron Thomas, who can score as well at the end of the first round. I really like the Kessler Edwards pick. He was my sleeper from Pepperdine, and I think he's kind of like a Matisse Thybulle, a guy who could be an impact defender right away. But at the same time, I don't know how many minutes you can really expect him to get. So I do think that the wing defense, especially with Harden and Harris not being known for their defensive ability, and then just defense in general, I guess, is where I'm getting at. This team is going to have to win games by scoring a lot of points, which they can do, but I think they are going to be susceptible to the occasional shootout loss.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we saw their defense collapse down the stretch. They tried to address that with some of their acquisitions late in the year. They brought in some players that could play defense. Jeff Green was someone that was very valuable on the team last year. You mentioned him playing the 5 in our predictions episode, and sure as hell, he was in there playing at the 5 as the season went on in the small ball lineup there. He actually played at the 5 during the playoffs, if I'm not mistaken, too. So he saw some shine in that area. Do you think the absence of Jeff Green will have any sort of role on this team, or do you think it's already filled?
I think it will have at least a little bit of an impact. I think a guy like Edwards might be able to fill that role, at least to an extent. But Green is a guy who is extremely versatile on the defensive end. He can still add the three-point shot as well offensively. So the Nets can really space the floor. I think they can still do that on the offensive end. I don't think they're going to have to worry too much there. But defensively, I don't think they're going to have a guy who's quite that versatile, who can guard at least 3, if not 4 or 5 positions on the defensive end. That is something that they're going to miss. I don't think that Blake Griffin or LaMarcus Aldridge or Millsap, for example, none of them are able to be that versatile on the defensive end. So I think that'll matter to an extent, but not something so serious that it will derail them from being, at the very least, Eastern Conference contenders.
All right, let's wrap up this Nets talk, and let's finish it with a prediction. Where do you think they finish at the end of the year, and where do they place in the East?
Man, there's something just telling me with the super team thing that they might come up just short. So I'm going to go. I think they're going to finish with the second best record in the East, losing the Eastern Conference Finals.
Okay. I think
I know I could very easily be proven wrong about that.
Yeah, you could. I think they got the best record in the East, strictly based on the talent alone. I mean, you heard Herb Brooks say it. You don't have enough talent to win on talent alone. I think they do have enough talent to win on talent alone. However, they will not win an NBA championship on talent alone. I think they get to the finals, and they do not win the NBA Finals. So stay tuned a little bit later to find out who they'll lose to. But let's switch over to the New York Knicks, a team that we saw in action this evening. This evening, meaning Wednesday night, as this episode is being recorded. They played a crazy game against the Boston Celtics where Jaylen Brown had a career high. It was interesting seeing everybody out there on the floor. I thought some players looked good. But before all that, let's get into the full long-term expectations of this team this year, which is, what is your expectations of the New York Knicks?
It's a really difficult question to answer, I think. The Knicks are coming off a pleasant surprise kind of season last year where they exceeded everyone's possible expectations. It wasn't supposed to be a year where they were more than, say, a fringe contender for the play-in at most, I think, was the most optimistic projection I could find. And instead, I understand a lot of injuries and some Eastern Conference teams were down, but the Knicks still finished the season on a high note, finished 4th in the East, had home court advantage in the first round. I know they bowed out pretty early in a 5-game series in the first round, but that was you couldn't have even imagined that at the beginning of the season. I know I didn't even have it on my radar. And now this year, the Knicks, they clearly are trying to build off of that. They have a lot more roster continuity. Almost everyone is back. They made 2 significant changes, which are bringing in Kemba Walker and Evan Fournier, and they let Elfrid Payton and Reggie Bullock go. Outside of that, the rest of the major contributors are back for this team. So they signed guys to 2 or 3 year deals. They have financial flexibility. They have the same coaching staff, or at least the same head coach, most of the same roster. They're clearly trying to build a foundation here. They think they started one last year. I think there's some logic to that. It's kind of nice having a team that's not completely volatile in the offseason for once, because that's usually the Knicks' existence for the last decade or so, if not more. But the Eastern Conference has also gotten better. The Nets and the Bucks, you expect to remain at the top of the conference, but you look at teams like Atlanta, Miami, Boston, Chicago, Indiana. I think even if the Knicks are a better overall team, especially a better overall offensive team, I find it highly unlikely they finish 4th in the conference again.
Really? So you do think there's some sort of a decline this year?
It might not necessarily be a decline. They might be a better team that just happens to play in a better conference.
That's fair.
I think the Hawks and the Heat in particular are going to be really good again. I think they're going to be real contenders, finish 3rd, 4th, 5th. The Sixers are obviously a wild card with the whole Ben Simmons situation, but they could still be a very good team in this conference as well. And then I mentioned the Celtics, ton of injuries last year they were ravaged by. healthier right now. I know the Knicks thankfully survived them here in opening night, but long way to go this season. You can make a similar health argument for the Pacers, who were decimated with injuries last season. We'll see how they do with that this year. And the Bulls, who are extremely active in the offseason. That's a lot of competition right there. Hopefully, the Knicks are able to finish it ahead of at least some of those teams. There's no way they finish ahead of all of them, though, I don't think. The Knicks just don't have the star power or the top end talent yet of those other teams. So they could overachieve with a Thibodeau coach team like they did last year, but I don't think they could finish, say, third or fourth in the East. I just don't see it.
Okay, I get that take. You mentioned a couple names that I like you brought in. You mentioned Kemba Walker. Obviously, I watched him play. Being with the local channels, the Charlotte Hornets were constantly on over the once I moved down here, and I mean Kemba was when he's on a bad team, that guy will drop 50 out of nowhere. I mean, he has the ability to score the basketball. He didn't show it in the opener, but look, when he gets the chances to take those shots, he's going to be taking a ton of them. And Evan Fournier, a nice veteran shooter. He's a consistent player. I know you weren't too big on the signing once it happened. I remember you were a little bit thinking, I don't understand the thought process of bringing in an Evan Fournier type, but he's a veteran. He's a shooting guard. He can shoot the basketball, and he brings that element to the Knicks that they got last year. But he's another veteran piece that can help fill that roster out a little bit. You still have Derrick Rose, brought him back. Big performance from Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson in the season opener. I think that's going to be your biggest piece right there. Will you get the same season? Now, it's going to be tough to duplicate what Randle did last year, but will you get that version of Julius Randle, and will you get a healthy Mitchell Robinson? If you have those two to go along with the pieces added and Obi Toppin, who looked good in the opener, I mean, this team is good. This team is damn good, and their coach good.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things to like. Like, I don't think if the Knicks finish, say, sixth or seventh in the East, I don't think that would even be a bad thing. Like, I think we have to calibrate our expectations here. It would still be something they're clearly building. They're clearly a team that is a lot more stable. There's a lot more positives than negatives. They're building a positive culture around them, and then hopefully that attracts people around the league. And if that situation ever presented itself, or we continue to build on it with growth from younger players and the draft capital we have. Like, that would be a much more intelligent way to run the team. And because we're the New York Knicks, and because we are operating in the city's biggest market, the country's biggest market, biggest city, people will want to join the Knicks if they are run competently. And I'm hoping that this can stick. I know that there's precedent for a certain someone to come in and ruin that. I'm really hoping that's not the situation right now, because there is a lot to like about how the Knicks are being run in terms of the front office, coaching staff. Yeah, I'm not saying that we're not championship contenders right now, but that's not. I don't mean that as an insult. There's still a lot of things to like, and I thought it was interesting tonight. I know first game of the year, the Knicks really shortened the rotation as that game went along. I don't expect that to be a regular occurrence every game, but Thibodeau does have that tendency to play everyone big minutes, and I do worry about that a little bit, especially for Kemba Walker and Derrick Rose.
Yeah, he would just, I mean, he's a workhorse. That's what he is. He loves the defense. He loves the added physicality to a game. And look, you do that in a season opener in a double overtime contest against a tough opponent like the Celtics, that's gonna wear on you, man. That is gonna wear on you. These are, I mean, there's veterans on this team. There's some old players. I mean, there is a mix of nice young players, but you run out there. You send Derrick Rose out there. He's going to be icing those knees big time, even in a backup role. I mean, that's a lot of minutes for someone at his age and given his track record of injuries and all that stuff. But one more name I wanted to bring up who had a great preseason and looked pretty darn good in the opener too is R.J. Barrett. I think there could potentially be a breakout season coming for him.
He's one of the biggest X factors on this team, but there are several. I don't think the Knicks are a team with one X factor. I think they have a lot. You mentioned a lot of it. Can Randall replicate or at least come close to, maybe even improve on his career year that he had last year? RJ Barrett going into year 3 definitely was better year 2 than year 1. Will he continue to grow? I think he will. He was outstanding on the defensive end tonight, especially, and made his presence more known offensively in the second half and hit a big 3 in the first overtime. But I think the biggest one of all is Mitchell Robinson and his defense. As great as Nerlens Noel was last season, and I expect him to have a similarly important and impactful defensive role. Him being out for the opener tonight and Taj Gibson also being out, I think he just had a kid. That left Mitchell Robinson as the only one of those three centers who was available tonight. We had Jericho Sims, the second round pick, who played a few minutes, but it was with Noel and Gibson being out, it gave Toppin a lot more run, which I want to see. We saw more of him and Julius Randle as a pairing. There are so many different factors here. So Emmanuel quickly didn't really play a lot tonight. Even Alec Burks didn't really play a lot tonight. I don't expect that to be the norm. The Knicks, one of their biggest strengths, I think, is their relative depth and their bench. The trio of Derrick Rose, quickly, and Alec Burks especially were really effective last season when Rose came over, and I do think that will continue. Topping off the bench with those three running towards the rim, the bench is really important. It's just the Knicks' biggest strength last year was how great they were defensively and the limiting opponents' three-point percentage. Are they likely to finish first in the league again with that? No, I don't think they are. And one of my bigger questions is just how much of that defense is sustainable, because one place where Bullock is definitely better than Fournier is on the defensive end.
Yeah, that is that's a good point there. Fournier doesn't give you a lot defensively, but I mean, I mentioned he's that veteran in the room, but you have plenty of those with that are on the bench there with Taj Gibson and Noel and people that have seen the league, been around the league. But I think it's a great mix. You get a good mix of veterans, you get a good mix of young players, and you have a veteran head coach who is hard nosed and gets his players to buy in, and you have something special brewing here. And I truly believe this. I'll go on the record at 12:10 a.m. as this is recorded on Thursday morning and dropped about 12 hours later. In the season opener right here, I will say with the season preview, the New York Knicks are a very good basketball team. They are. I mean, you mentioned the depth. I see superstar potential out of some players on the roster. I think Kemba Walker was a great addition. This team is very, very good. And I'll say they're above the Heat. I got them as a 4 seed in the East. I think they are a legit basketball team. I question. I want to ask you this question because I don't technically see any issues or any areas where okay they need to improve this because they're not deep enough here. They have the depth. They have the head coach. They have the team. I'm sitting here thinking there's nothing wrong with this basketball team, and I'm sure you can point something out, but lead me to where I think I'm wrong.
I mean, there's definitely some solid players at every position on the roster. I get what you're saying. The depth is pretty good. It's a relatively well-rounded team. We know that they're coached hard, and they should at least have well, outside of the end of the fourth quarter of tonight's game, they should be better defensively, I think, than they were for much of tonight. I do think free throw shooting, if we're going to really nitpick, I think that might be a minor issue. It wasn't great tonight. The Knicks don't have too many great free throw shooters on the team, so just something to keep an eye on there. But outside of that, like I get that you can point to guys who can knock down a three. You have Walker and Rose now. You can run the pick and roll. You have bringing in Walker and Fournier. The idea there, I understood it. They are both more well-rounded and versatile offensive players than, well, we all know Peyton was nobody's favorite, but Reggie Bullock offensively, he's a great shooter, but he's strictly catch and shoot. Evan Fournier can definitely do more than that. Reggie Bullock's amazingly only took 71 free throws in 2 years with the Knicks. I think the Knicks this year, they're going to take a ton more threes. They have a lot of guys who can shoot. Thibodeau has even said that himself. I expect the Knicks to be more aggressive getting to the line, and I hope that they do that, but I also hope they knock down their free throws when they get there. Like, I think the only area where they're really lacking is they just don't have that same level of star power or top end talent that these other teams have, and that is still important. Like, I don't think you go back to like the mid 2000s Pistons, who didn't have a true superstar but played extremely well as a team, won one championship, almost won a second. I don't know if that's really realistic in today's NBA with how star driven it is now, but I do think it's realistic enough where you can have a good overachieving team, just not quite to that level.
I get that. I get that. I mean, that's a good point. I think, I'm high on this Knicks team, and I'm going to stay high on them. I'm going to ride or die with this Knicks squad the rest of the season. So maybe that puts me as an oddball or whatever, but that's where I stand on them. Where do you stand on them? Where do you see the Knicks?
I think they'll be battling for somewhere between the 5 and 9 to 10 seeds. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. I think there's a lot of factors. Like the Knicks stayed pretty healthy last year, except for
Yeah.
Mitchell Robinson. Like considering how many minutes that Thibodeau plays these guys, I don't know how likely that is to continue. And I think the Knicks would be wise with Walker and Rose to give them occasional nights off. I think it would be wise to do that. And if they do, then we'll see a couple of rookies who didn't really play tonight. I'm curious to see what Miles McBride and Quentin Grimes can do. I think Grimes played for like 12 seconds tonight, but McBride didn't see the court at all. And I think he definitely will if one of those guys is rested. So, and I think it would be wise to give Randall and Barrett reduced minutes here and there if possible. Now, I'm not saying that they're not important, but I think relying on all these guys to play 30 or 40 minutes every night will make them a little bit more likely to get injured at some point, and that could lead to some issues. So my goal is to avoid the play-in tournament. I want to finish in the top 6 if possible, but if not, I think it's realistic to say they need to be in the play-in tournament if they can stay healthy
Yeah.
as a floor.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, health does have a big factor. I mean, you can't really factor it into the season unless you show the injury-prone players on the team to where you say, okay, possibly here, but you never want to predict injuries or anything like that. So it's hard to base it off of that. But if this Knicks team stays healthy, like I said, I got them as a 4 seed in the East. So let's head over to the Chicago Bulls. The Bulls open their season against the Detroit Pistonians, and they played the Pistons, and they won the game. It was a defensive battle. I thought Lonzo Ball showed some great help defense. I mean, he's a great defender. That's something I questioned. I questioned his shooting. I didn't question his playmaking ability at the point guard position. I knew he'd bring that over there. But I mean, he showed great defensive versatility. Him and DeRozan look great in that area. I mean, this Bulls team has a different feel to it coming in. I saw Charles Barkley. He has the Bulls over the Miami Heat as a 4 seed. That's where I got the Knicks personally. But this Bulls team's interesting. They have some holes. They have something going for them. How do you feel about the Bulls?
Well, first of all, if Charles Barkley likes you guys, you're fucked. He does kind of have that kiss of death sometimes with his predictions, man. They are absolute shit sometimes. But look, the Bulls are in some ways similar to the Knicks in terms of it's kind of hard to peg exactly what their expectations are. But they were extremely active in the offseason, and that makes sense considering the Bulls went all in with the Vucevic trade at the deadline in the middle of last season, and they followed up on that by being really aggressive in free agency. They brought in Lonzo Ball, like you mentioned. They brought in DeMar DeRozan. They made trades. They ended up with Derek Jones. They brought in Alex Caruso. They do not have Lauri Markkanen or Wendell Carter anymore. I know that Carter was traded last year, but there has been a lot of turnover on this team. And the Bulls went all in to try to sneak into the play-in last year. Didn't work with injuries, but this year, I think it's a lot more likely. Now, I think they're in a similar boat in terms of a lot of Eastern Conference teams you could look at. I didn't even mention the Hornets, for example, who were in the play-in last year.
Right.
And you can make arguments for the Wizards even or the Raptors. Like it's the Eastern Conference has improved. But I think the Bulls are at the very least in position to be a play-in team, but I think there's a lot of variables there just because they do have a little bit less depth at some spots than say the Knicks do.
Yeah, they do. But yeah, I do not like the depth on this team. I don't really. I mean, they have Kobe White. He's a nice guard outside of Caruso. Caruso played tonight. He looked pretty good. You know, when I saw the box score, I don't want to read too much into game one, but I think only 9 players played, 8 players, and it was Caruso and everyone else with 20 plus minutes. The rest of them really low minutes, if not under 10 for the majority of the bench. I'm sitting here thinking it's a Mike Bray coach game, but no. Billy Donovan, I think, he's a great head coach. He gets everyone to I mean that signing right there, last off season to bring him in, sort of instill that culture is something that has been working pretty solid for the Bulls. And I love their aggressiveness by Karnisovas. But the number one factor is Zach LaVine. That guy is a monster. He's a playmaker. He's a shooter. He does everything well on a basketball floor. I mean, there's times where he shoots contested shots and it's just bang. No rim, no nothing, just right in the bucket. I mean, that guy is money. And Zach LaVine is a solid basketball player. He's going to be the number one factor on this Bulls team. I think we can all agree on that. I'm not pointing anything unobvious on that one, but Zach LaVine, I think he still has another gear he's got to get to. And I think he's going to take that step this year of being a superstar in the NBA. Because a lot of people think, oh, wow, he's a great player. Not anymore. This guy's going to be a superstar with Lonzo Ball around him, with DeMar DeRozan, with Vucevic down low. There's so much room for him to grow, and he's still a phenomenal basketball player.
LaVine is definitely the number one option, but in terms of individual stats, I don't think it's impossible they decline slightly, and not because of anything he does, but yeah, there was a time for multiple years where he was the main option on the Bulls, and the offense was really stagnant around him. They didn't really have anyone else who can score. That's not the case anymore. You have other guys who can help take some of the load off of his shoulders. If he happens to have an off night, or at the very least, the offense should flow a lot better, and you'll have more than one guy. So I think that you have to consider how much defense is a focus on him. If he's smart enough to make the plays to elevate those around him, the Bulls will be a better team for it. But I don't mean that as an insult or anything. LaVine has Lonzo Ball distributing now, which is really good. You have Patrick Williams, who we haven't mentioned yet, who I think had a really promising rookie season. I think he is going to absolutely take a step forward. There should be nights where he looks like the best player on the court. We already know what kind of defensive impact he has, how versatile he is. Offensively, he got more assertive as the season went on. I expect him to show more confidence and growth on that end. And then you have DeMar DeRozan, who, well, I still think he was overpaid. He absolutely is good at creating shots for himself and others. Nikola Vucevic is somebody who can give you 20 and 10 on any given night down low. So there is a lot of alternatives there, and former All-Stars for Bulls players who can help shoulder the load for Zach LaVine if the defense overloads on him or he has an off night. I think that takes a lot of pressure on him, or a lot of pressure off of him. And I expect this Bulls team to run. I expect it to be really up-tempo. They want defense leading to offense. I expect them to really push the pace.
Yeah, they have the ability to do that now with Alonzo Ball, and he's a playmaker. That's something Kobe White wasn't, and it's something that the Bulls point guard hasn't been able to do since Derrick Rose was there. That ability to facilitate and pass the ball, drive to the rim, all that stuff. I think we see a lot more rims being rattled this year with finishes with dunks as the season goes on there too. But you bring up a good point on Patrick Williams. He's someone that I don't want to draw this comparison at all because he's obviously a much better player. But I see someone like a Pascal Siakam who came into the league at a young age, not really. It took him a little while to develop, and he developed into a great player. Good defensively is his number one skill, and then he started to develop an offensive game. And look, he has playmakers around him now. That's something that he didn't have last year. It took him a little while to get that, but last year he didn't have the talent he has around him right now. He solidified as the four on that team. He can do a lot of great things in that area. So I think it's nice for him to finally get a chance to grow and sort of build upon what he brought in his rookie season, which was still pretty solid. So I think it's big, and it's big on the front office to say, look, Lauri Markkanen, I'm sorry, you're gone. This is Patrick Williams. This is his spot on this starting lineup. It doesn't matter what the rest of the way goes. We're riding or dying with our number one or our first round pick last year. And he's shown pretty good strides. But there is one area that really concerns me, and it's concerned me for the last two off seasons, and it's the depth at the center position. No more Daniel Tice. No more Cristiano Felicio, thank God. There is no center depth on this team. You could mention Avery Bradley, but tonight, I mean that's it's sick. It's sick. I mean, they're number 5 in a small ball lineup tonight was Alize Johnson. I mean, that's not going to get it done when you play a team like the Bucks.
Well, I do agree that the center depth is not a great option for them. I think the bench has a little bit more talent outside of that position than most people give it credit for. In the Markkanen trade, I really like the Derek Jones pickup for the Bulls. He's a fantastic athlete, and I'm not saying he's a center or anything, but I do think he's kind of a lesser version of Patrick Williams in some ways in terms of the freakish athleticism, and that he can definitely have an impact defensively. Offensively, you'll see the dunks here and there that he is more than capable of. I think Alize Johnson's a solid bench piece as well, but behind Vucevic, who's not known for his defense, I do understand that there might be some games where the Bulls get dominated on the boards if Williams isn't able to help crash the glass a bit. I definitely think that could be an issue. Second chance points. The Bulls' bigger concerns are, to me, on the defensive end, and that lack of depth might not help with, or definitely won't help with that. Some of these guys might get tired. They have a relatively short rotation. Kobe White is out for the beginning of this season with recovering from shoulder surgery as well, so that doesn't help the situation. In the meantime, the Bulls have Ayo Dosunmu, who might be able to pick up some of the slack in the backcourt, but
Yeah.
the biggest upgrade defensively to me is definitely Lonzo, because the perimeter defense is where I think the source of the Bulls' defensive struggles have been the last couple of years. And nothing. I like Kobe White in a reduced role. Tell him to go get as many buckets as possible. He can do that. But starting point guard, he is a sieve on the defensive end. I don't think the post defense is going to be a great thing for the Bulls either. But Lonzo's impact, Alex Caruso's impact on the defensive end, that should definitely help at least limit the opposing team's best shot creators at least a little bit in the backcourt.
Yeah, you mentioned DeSumo. He actually played tonight. He put up 7 points in 11 minutes. Like, he was out there contributing on offense, and I think he's stepping in with obviously Kobe White missing time. That's where his playing time comes from. But he's an Illinois kid, second round pick. So maybe playing for the Chicago Bulls is something that helps him out in that area. And I do apologize. I said Avery Bradley. I meant Tony Bradley. So that's what I meant at the center position there. So yeah, I didn't mean the 6'2" guard. I meant the center, if you will.
Oh my goodness. Hey, what if you want some center depth? You want to bring Luke Cornett back?
Yeah, Luke Cornett, or better yet, it's Joakim Noah night coming up on October 29th against the New York Knicks at home. So maybe Joakim could throw on the uniform for all time's sake. And I can't believe that Joakim Noah night against the Knicks. I mean, I guess it makes sense because he played for both teams. Tom Thibodeau returns. So, I mean, hey, there's your chance, Joakim. You get your time to shine. How about you throw on the uniform and play backup center? That's a defensive upgrade.
Oh my goodness, you're giving me some flashbacks on that one. Is it the Bulls' active offseason? I think we're seeing them follow the pattern. Karnisovas and them were aggressive at the deadline, aggressive in free agency in the draft. But I guess it comes back, original question, considering a lot of the factors we talked about in the Knicks segment so far here, expectations for the Bulls for this season. What do you think their best and worst case scenarios are?
Best case scenario, they take that 4 seed that the Knicks have in my predictions. I don't think that's the case. Worst case scenario, I think they're a 7. I personally have them in that 5-6 range. I think the teams above them, I mentioned, I, I, man, the Heat, dude. I don't know how to gauge the Heat. Kyle Lowry goes over there. I mean, I don't know how I feel about Miami yet, but I think they're obviously a little bit better than Philly. The Celtics are healthy. You brought that point up. Philly's a little bit off. So I think right now, you got to look at that, and I think you got to look. And I'm gonna say I got them as a 6 seed.
Yeah, I think sixth is a pretty reasonable expectations for them. Like, I think they're going to end up being one of those teams that's on the bubble of avoiding the play-in tournament between the 7th and 10th place teams and being in the playoffs without having to worry about that. Honestly, I'm sure Bulls fans' similar goal is for me at least with the Knicks is finish in the top 6 and avoid it. I think the Bulls end up finishing 7th. I think they'll be the first play-in team, but I also think that they'll win that play-in game and just end up in the playoffs anyway. I think they're too talented not to, but I think the some of the limitations they have on the defensive side outside of Lonzo will limit their upside a little bit. And if there were to be any injury to Lonzo Ball, that perimeter defense would take an immediate nosedive.
It would. It would. That's a good point. I mean, he brings so much to your team that I didn't think he would bring when he came over, but he does. He brings that added versatility. He brings a lot to your basketball team, and he's a true point guard. Glad to have him there, and glad to have him a part of the Bulls. So that's going to wrap it up for today's segment. We talked all 3 basketball teams. Stay tuned for next week. Don't know what we'll be talking about. Maybe we'll get into more NFL teams. Maybe we'll get into some NHL coverage. We'll discuss and hop right into it. We'll be sure to let you guys know. Be sure to check us out on Twitter at Big City Sports PD. Also check us out on all of our podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, if you want to head over there. Leave a like, leave a subscribe, leave a review, leave a comment, all that good stuff. Rate us out of 5 stars. If you feel we're 5, make sure you put 5 on there. And but until next time, for Slig, I'm Dylan, and we will see you next time.